Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar of 2025 on high school preparedness. High school, are you ready for it? I'm so pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists this evening and to welcome our featured sponsor, Winston Preparatory School. At the heart of Winston Prep's learning methodology is understanding each and every student's individual learning need and profile, often for the first time in their lives. Typically, individual learning opportunities for students with learning disabilities are limited, and IEPs tend to focus on short-term goals and don't account for social and emotional needs. Winston Prep is unique in connecting research with practice and understanding exactly how individual learning and developmental strengths and needs work. Through Winston's continuous feedback system, the school's expert faculty continually assess how students respond to their skill development plan. Thank you, Winston, for your support. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to our 2024 class of corporate partners for the past year of their support and partnership. Without their friendship, so much of what we do would not be possible. I'd like to extend an acknowledgement to WealthSpire Advisors and Eagle Hill School at the platinum level, at the gold level, Winston Preparatory School, and at the silver level. We are grateful for the Fusion Academy, Villa Maria School, American School for the Deaf, and Chapel Haven Schliefer Center. Thank you all so much for your support. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Special Education Legal Fund. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since then, we have provided over $1.2 million in grants for legal and advocacy support to hundreds of families across 80 plus school districts in Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. We provide these grants principally through two programs: the Attorney Grant Program, which provides families with a grant of up to $6,000 for legal support, and the Advocate Grant, which provides families with up to $1,000 in advocacy support. For more information about the process, you visit our website at www.spedlegalfund.org and click the orange Apply for Grant button. And we are, just so everyone knows, the March grant cycle, it will open on February 22nd, and the application portals will be open at that time. Applications are due on the 15th of the month. Interviews have to be completed by the 22nd, and all of those who apply and complete all of those steps will be informed of the status of their application by the end of the month or March 31st. March also brings with us a very exciting collaborative opportunity. The Self and Seek Resource Fair is coming Sunday, March 30th at the Stanford JCC from 2 to 5 p.m. We're really, really pleased to bring this resource fair back to Fairfield County and to provide, families and parents with the opportunity to meet and mingle with educators, special education attorneys and advocates, professionals, and other organizations that provide services to children and families with special needs. You can scan the QR code to register or go to Eventbrite to the link that you registered for this webinar to sign up. Past exhibitors for this event have included, obviously, attorneys, advocates, special education schools, speech and language pathologists, psychologists, and other nonprofit organizations. We are really, really thrilled this year. This is going to be new for us to present 3 panels, a 2:00 attorney panel, which is, really explores how to find the right special education attorney for your family, featuring attorneys Dana Johnson, Jennifer Laviano, Andy Feinstein, Penelope Petzold, Robin Keller, Laura Hennigan, Paul Barger, and Jeff Forte. At 3:00, we're going to explore how to find the right special education school for your family, featuring educators representing Winston Prep, Villa Maria, Fusion Academy, Spire, Franklin Academy, Eagle Hill School, and more. And finally, at 4, we're very excited to present a panel of special education advocates, including Danny Cohen, Stacy T.A., Diane Wilcuts, Virginia Blum, Jane Faraday, Ann Munkenbeck, Julie Swanson, and Caroline Walker-Leram to explore what is a special education advocate, what do they do, and how does that different from what special education attorneys do. These three panels are based on actually the three most common questions that we get at SELF from our families: how to find the right attorney, how to find the right school, and what is an advocate. So we're really excited to be able to break that down for families and provide that informational resource to them during the March 30th resource fair. So with that, really, really excited to welcome this distinguished panel of educators to discuss preparing for high school for students with special education needs. Kicking it off with Bill DeHaven. Bill's been head of Villa Maria School in Stamford for the past 5 years and is a veteran educator, having spent more than 20 years at Winston Prep, New York, prior to joining us up here in Fairfield County. Bill is also a veteran of our webinar series. This, I think, is your sixth appearance on a panel, and you have also moderated our panel, a panel on transition to middle school. So welcome back, Bill.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Next up is a huge welcome. It goes out to Alexandra Allie Gantz, who is joining us for the first time representing Eagle Hill in her capacity as the Director of Placement at Eagle Hill. And we're really excited to have her for the first time and hear her perspective and expertise. The fun fact about Allie is that I think she might be the only person that enjoys visiting schools more than I do, having clocked more than 55 visits to different schools in the last 18 months. So welcome to our webinar panel, Allie.
Thank you.
Next up, welcome back to the SELF webinar series to Beth Sugarman. I mean, Beth is such a fixture for me this series that actually when I was looking back earlier this week, I realized that, you haven't actually been on one in a little while. So I'm really excited to have you back in this one. Beth was a participant on our very first webinar in 2020, a participant on our last in-person panel back at Second Congregational Church. And, Beth, my fun fact about Beth is always that she's been a part of this organization since before it was born, really, as she was one of the first people that I bounced this idea off of when we were laying the foundation for what would become SELF. She's been a board member of Special Education Legal Fund since 2020 and a source of constant support, and for, both for the organization and, personally, for me and my family. So welcome back, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Next up, welcome back to the SELF webinar series to Tammy Moscrip. This is Tammy's fourth appearance on a SELF webinar, having previously guested on, approved and non-approved schools, therapeutic schools, and a couple anxiety and mental health, I think, as well. And now, obviously, high school, preparedness. My fun fact about Tammy is that she shares an alma mater with both me and my youngest. So welcome back, Tammy, and it's a great day to be a Bobcat.
Thank you so much, Christine.
You're welcome. And finally, last but not least, a huge welcome to our last panelist, Maggie Gregory from Fusion Academy. This is Maggie's third turn on a SELF webinar, having previously appeared back in the day on Getting Past the Sticker Shock, as well as our executive function webinar. Maggie's also board member at Special Education Legal Fund and has been a great source of support for my family, particularly through COVID and actually through both of my children's high school journeys. So welcome back, Maggie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Finally, disclaimer time. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of advice, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in the state of their residence to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund of any of the participants in the panel, any of the attorneys, advocates, other professionals, or schools. For webinar participants, this should be viewed as a public forum. Do not ask questions in the Zoom platform about your child or your child's specific legal or educational situation. Please refrain from any comments that include identifying information about your child, including but not limited to name, grade, school, school district, etc. Please remember that your name is visible, your screen name can be visible to panelists, participants, and Special Education Legal Fund. This webinar is being recorded and will be distributed or shown at a later date by Special Education Legal Fund. High school, are you ready for it? Thank you all for joining us this evening. It's a really, really interesting topic, I think, for all of us. And so I wanted to kick off this, this panel, because you all have such great and, a real depth of experience. Is what's the biggest change in your view that students have to make when transitioning from middle school to high school?
I'll jump right in. I mean, Christine, thanks again for having us. I think this is it is a topic that everyone starts thinking about, I think probably when our kids are in elementary school. I think the biggest change, I think to expect, or the change that our kids are not ready for, is the amount of independence they're going to have. It's something that they want desperately, and they're not ready for that independence. They don't have the stamina to work independently. They've been lucky to be in elementary and middle schools where there's been support. There's a team of teachers. There is a lot of breakdown of information that the work has been scaffolded, often, especially the kids coming from our schools. And they're often entering a larger school where there is less scaffolding, and it's a little bit overwhelming. So I think that, making sure that our kids understand themselves, and are really good self-advocates is what's really important for them to be successful.
Great. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Bill. Sorry, Maggie. Thank you. I think absolutely the kind of self-imposed structure, those executive function skills, right? The self-management, being able to initiate a task, to persevere when it's difficult, the self-advocacy, speaking up for yourself, knowing when you need help, feeling confident enough to be able to seek those resources. And I think routinizing, having sort of patterns and established routines, thinking about your wake up routine and your homework routine and using a planner, all of those things are going to be really essential in high school as you have increased demands on your time, cognition, social emotional, trying to manage extracurricular activities and your social interests. So I think a lot of those executive function skills are going to be in demand in the high school transition.
Agreed. And to support Tammy and Bill, I think both the independence and the organization, I think it's so important that families, parents allow their children to kind of target that independence that we're talking about, supporting them with some of these structures that we discussed, kind of supporting that structure and organization, and being able to look at bigger projects. I think high school, whether it's a school like those of us here on the screen, or more of a mainstream setting, I think the projects become a bit more long-term. They're bigger. You're writing papers, you're doing projects. You're also involved, I think, in classroom discussions more, and getting kids comfortable with that experience, speaking publicly, speaking before class. And certainly those are skills that we target each and every one of our schools, and the comfortability that our students need in order to succeed. But I think breaking down, being comfortable, that executive function that we talked about, being comfortable with large projects and knowing how to break those down into time management and organization, and more feasible, smaller projects. I think that's something that parents could ask their schools to do if they're not doing that, and supporting their children in doing that.
Yeah, and just to bring all of that together too, I think that there's a big transition for both parents and students when you get to high school. There's a lot of assumptions that I think teachers make, that you should know this by now, or that they have these tools to do this. And if it's a transition from a separate middle school to a high school, they don't know your child going into high school. So being a self-advocate and being able to go forward and ask for help, or find ways to practice or supplement those gaps that your child may have, that you may be seeing, to help support them in that transition, especially if it's to a new school.
Allie?
I think that it sounds silly maybe, but just the actual physical act of navigating a campus and school, whether you're coming from a smaller private school and going into a public school, or just the transition from a middle to a high school. Typically, high schools are a little bit bigger. And kind of how our kids navigate that and find their way and find their classes. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of practice by going to events at the school, touring the school with your child. But whenever I talk to parents, that's like the first thing they talk about. They're like, I can't imagine my kiddo walking.
How are they going to get around the school? How are they going to get around the
Exactly.
school? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Let's take that theme of kind of independence in, that Bill, sort of that brought up at the beginning, and, and look at it from both the classroom perspective, and then, outside the classroom. How do you start preparing, our kids, and by our kids, I mean, kids that are enrolled at your school, kids with an IEP, kids with a 504. How do you start preparing those kids for the greater level of independence that, is necessary on the academic front in high school?
Well, I think specifically, we provide at Winston, we provide students an opportunity to take college level courses through Landmark College. Those have been virtual since before virtual was a thing, before people were so comfortable with this type of setting. And that kind of exposes our students to what is a syllabus. And again, that time management. You have a class now every week or maybe twice a week. How do you manage? How do you get the homework done between those periods? So there's so much exposure to and discussion as to that organization and taking larger projects and breaking them down in tasks into more manageable units. And I think that socially, teaching kids how to navigate socially with one another, kind of maybe removing ourselves somewhat and letting them learn that problem solving, both academically, right? How do I speak to a professor? How do I reach out for an extension? How do I get that support? Whether it's, and practice within that high school setting. This is your preparation for the next step, which is much more open-ended, whatever that be, whether it's the workforce or a college setting. You're not amongst your peers anymore. You're not going to have that structure and support. So I think high school is the opportunity in which to kind of remove ourselves, not as educators, as to your point, Christine, how do we prepare kids, but we prepare them by exposing them to these experiences so that they do have the opportunity to learn with our support and to also know when to kind of remove ourselves and say, well, how should you go about doing that? As opposed to fixing it. And I think we're parents, especially parents of kids with special needs, are used to being your child's voice and your child's advocate. And ultimately, the word is independence. We want our kids to be independent. We want to be obsolete, and the good obsolete, I would say, right? And in order to do that, parents, you're going to have to remove yourselves a little bit, but definitely collaborate with your school. No matter mainstream setting, conventional type of school setting, reach out to the person, whoever that point person is, especially if your child has an IEP or they have a person, there's that person for you, and to the school that you're working with. If it's any of us on the screen or others like us, who can you talk to and say, how are we managing this independence? How are we going to get to that next level? What exposure is my child getting, and what skills are they practicing in order to leave with that toolbox?
Tammy?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Beth. So true. I think as much as we want to not be helicoptering and hovering and constantly reminding our children, where they need to be and what they need to do, I think in middle school and thinking about the transition to high school, I think it's really important that the parents do have some awareness of what the child's day is like, right? Because inevitably the student comes home and mom and dad ask, how was school? And they say fine, or grunt, or whatever you get. It's very non-descriptive. You don't know how to interpret it. You don't know what it means. You don't know the course of the day. They go on that bus, they're in that black box, they come home and you have no details on what went on for the last 7 hours. So often the schools will have a student information system. And I think as a parent, it's about knowing how to strike a balance between obsessing, checking those grades and assignments every minute of every day, but also knowing it's there as a resource to fill in the vague fine that you might get from your student when they come home from school. And then to work with your student when they come home in middle school, take a look at whatever that student information system is. Do you have homework tomorrow? Did you get this assessment returned? Oh, I see this is a little bit tougher for you. Did you seek extra help with the teacher? Is this something I can help review with you? You've got this paper due tomorrow. How far along are you on it? How have you broken it down? What do you need help with? So I think creating some of that scaffolding that Bill was talking about before, it's important as a parent to be informed, to know what that day looks like, to better support your student in middle school so that they can start to then apply those skills in the transition to high school.
Fantastic.
Just to add to what Tammy and Beth have said, I've got an 8th grader at home now, and as I'm preparing him
You
to
are,
go,
that's right. You're preparing for the transition yourself.
and it's over again. It's overwhelming for parents because, and this is both me and his mom were both teachers. We're really good at breaking all of this. We're really good at being the executive function,
Coach.
coach, and we have to back off. So being on his school's information system, knowing what he has to do, not saying, I know that tonight you've got social studies and then you've got math and but just like Tammy said, just that reminder. And then how do we encourage that responsibility? What kinds of things are we doing to ask our kids to take responsibility for? That could be simple tasks at home to, here, when you get home, I need you to do X, Y, and Z by the time I get home. Or we resist it. Sometimes it is I'm speaking as a dad now. It is sometimes so much easier to do things than asking our kids to do them.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And it's so critical that our
Yeah.
kids just begin to struggle. And at times that's the other thing. We're not going to get to independence.
And don't bring that book that they left at home to school. Like that's a big thing. Like that's really hard to do. Like, oh, you forgot it. That's too bad.
Henry's school, Henry's middle school actually has a table, and I forget exactly what the title of the table is, but it's the shame table. Like, don't bring your kids hockey stick or
whatever
lunchbox to school. But if you're going to, there's a table outside the office.
Right. The table of
Great.
shame. The table of
Yes,
shame.
it's great.
Exactly.
But it's hard, right? It's hard to know that your kid forgot their lunch. It's hard to know that they forgot their sneakers and it's PE.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power in that for students to navigate those moments too. If mom didn't bring that book that I needed, and desensitizing them to understanding these, they may bump their head, these small failures that they need to work through to think of next time when they're packing up their bag and say, oh, I can't forget that because mom couldn't bring it to me last time, and working through those moments. At Fusion, I think it's important for us to have a series of these conversations when we know a student is transitioning to high school and then even to college. When we get to that point, you can't dump it all on them at once, but scheduling them out and having these small conversations that lead up to that transition about strengths that they have and those deficits too, and how they can in their next step be in touch with themselves to better prepare themselves also.
Absolutely. Allie, would you like to join in?
Yeah, just kind of what you guys were all saying. I think we never want to see our kiddos fail, but sometimes it's good to have them practice failure in a soft setting with warm, loving people that they're familiar with. I think that today's world, like, it's really hard for everybody, both kids, parents, adults, to kind of sit with discomfort, and it's actually a skill you have to practice. So working on that while you're in a familiar place is really going to kind of help you prepare for greater independence.
Wonderful. So I'm going to actually start with you. My next question, Allie, is, can you talk, we're going to talk, obviously, from where you are, you guys all see students transition to a variety of different settings. You might see them transition from your setting back to their district school, high school. I mean, I think that happens in, many cases for you, Allie, at Eagle Hill, and, and for the rest of you as well. What does that process look like when you start the transition to, to enable a child to move back to their district high school? They don't have a current IEP. They've been in your environment for a couple of years. Like, what does that process look like? How do you kind of lay it out?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing I would say to do is re-register with your district. A lot of kiddos that have been at a district, they aren't registered anymore. And I think I actually didn't realize that until a year or two ago. So you have to start by re-registering. And then I always recommend the sooner the better for you to reach out to the district to set up an IEP, PPT, CSE meeting and get that started. that's typically my first place I tell parents to go to if they're looking to transition back into the district. At our school, we kind of join as a team, the teachers, myself, educational advisors, and we kind of come up with what we think our kiddo would need in a public school, and we report out on that at the IEP meetings and kind of all work together to try to come up with a plan that would really be best for our kiddos. And then just from not as much as like the parent IEP preparation side, but more from like the child preparing them side, we really try to look at like what media devices are they using? Are they using a Chromebook? Are they using a Mac? And kind of getting them used to those type of things to get them back to kind of ready to transition to the public school. I know a lot of private schools use Google Classroom, and then I know Blackboard is used by a bunch of public schools. So we kind of, before sending them back to the district, want to make sure they're familiar with simple
That's
things
really
like that.
helpful. Yeah, absolutely. Bill, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think that the preparation really for us begins by sending my team out, the middle school team of teachers. It's when you're in our schools that are so supportive, and we've been doing this individualized education in such a great way, and we're sending our kids to, even when they go to our sister schools and they're bigger environments, sending our teachers out to see what those expectations will be at independent schools, at public schools, so that we have a better idea, because I think that we get into this really safe place. And so better to do that. And a lot of the conversation is the nebulous, building up that stamina to do that, again, back to the word independent word. How do I do that independent work longer and longer? How do I build up that time on task when we're removing the scaffolds, right? We're removing all that support, and how do I work with that? And so that's hard, when, as teachers, as parents, we're really trying to put those in, because our kids have been successful because of those scaffolds. And it's not going to be the same, especially when they leave our school and go back to district and go to large high schools.
Right.
Even with a great plan in place, it's still overwhelming.
I think it's a great point that you made just about how you all particularly are very, very familiar with each other and have great partnerships with each other, so that very much what it's going to look like for a child to land at Winston or at, Villamere or at Spire or whatever or at Fusion or whatever it is. You all know each other really, really well. And that's, and that's a great, and are partnered with the parent in trying to impart that information about what that landing's going to look like, like, hey, I know this environment, I know the school, I know the administrators, I know the teachers. It's much more comfortable that way.
Yeah.
And if I can add to that, I know with, talking about preparing students, if you are going from a school such as those of us here on the screen who provide that supportive structure, and you're going to a mainstream public school setting, which happens to a lot of our kids, which is wonderful. However, I know that, make sure that the child and your school is working with that public school. We're very familiar with that. We've done that. We sit and we share with the team. Granted, it will not be the level of support perhaps that we can all provide here, but just knowing that written language will need help in organization, or again, who's the point person. There may be some social misunderstandings. We're still working on that. Here's the strategies we use for those social breakdowns. Kind of share what it is that's worked for the child, and again, that's individualized. And hopefully the school, I think just being informed is helpful. And hopefully the child's team is informed. And we've seen that at some of our local public schools. And they've been involved with us in kind of setting up the child for success, because I think we all want that. So if that's something that you can take advantage of the people here and the people of your current school setting to provide, even if it's something less remedial and you're going into a public setting, to provide that information as to here's how the child succeeds, and make sure that your child also knows what those tools in their toolbox. What strategies help with reading comprehension? What do you use for written expression? How do you study for a test? How much time do you need? Start questioning your child a little bit too, to make sure that they own those skills, and again, towards the magic word of independence. But use your current school to help prepare your child for the next school, and the school for your child as well.
I'm just gonna, I know that, or to piggyback on what Beth said, if our kids are going through the IEP or a 504 process with the district, there's always going to be transitions goals, and a lot of districts are getting much better at person-centered planning, which is involving the kids and the families in making this, what supports do I need moving forward? And it brings everybody to the table. It's something that I've seen in districts over the past 2 or 3 years get much better at. They're prioritizing that.
Right.
So
Right.
so insist on that. Like Beth's saying, you can go back and just ask them for this. Hey, do you do parent-centered planning? I really want everybody involved. I want my son to be involved in this process. So you can hear from him the supports that he's going to need when he goes to your school.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in there, I fully agree. I think to Beth's point about asking your school to help prepare for that transition is really key. Aspire, like the others, we're small, right? We have group classes of 4 to 6 students. All of our students have life coaches that have small caseloads of about 8 students. So it's very nurturing, it's very individualized. And so when we're thinking about our students returning to a large public school, for example, we want to make sure they fully know, what they're getting into. So oftentimes we'll ask them to do shadow days, and we'll collaborate with the district. They can come back and be like, oh, wow, we need to work on independence. We need to work on study skills. We need to work on navigating a building and asking for help, increased homework, increased stamina, knowing how to manage, if they're going from middle school to high school, maybe changing classes, maybe having additional regions and lockers and the timing that they have to kind of rush around and be able to manage. So the idea of having students experience that live and then come back into our environment and have 3 to 6 months, basically a semester to be able to work on that transition is really key, because now the student is taking ownership. This isn't being done to them, it's being done with them. They're highly motivated to get to this next level. And now they have a sense of, strong motivation, intrinsic motivation to do that hard work, because all of this is uncomfortable. And it's really kind of dipping into that discomfort and recognizing, okay, this is a means to an end. These are skills that I want to develop to get to this next level.
Maggie?
Yeah, I had wonderful ideas written down, and Beth and Bill and Tammy said them all, but I'll add a little bit here. One of the things that we do at Fusion is we're really intentional with goal setting with our students and having them have a part in, because I do, seconding what Bill said before, having them have a seat at the table as a middle schooler transitioning into high school and knowing who they are and setting these goals, envisioning them in their next step and working towards them. It's very powerful. And another thing to add is also making sure that they're familiar. I think up until middle school and high school, a lot of families will shield their children from the IEP process and from the progress meetings, and sitting down and talking with these students about what accommodations are in place for them and what they utilize, what they should utilize, what can really help them in that next step of the process, and just celebrating as much as we can when they advocate for themselves and making sure that they know that these are really important moments, because they're going to have to continue to do this beyond Fusion or their current academic setting.
Fantastic. Allie, I'm going to start with you on this next question, because you're unique in our panelist, kind of group, in that, Eagle Hill doesn't have a high school. So the high school placement process, is obviously core in, what you're doing, and, and core to, what the school's doing. So talk about like how that, how you work with the family to, to think through that, to plan for that, to find the appropriate schools and whatever. And then everyone else is gonna have to layer on, like, the bit about like having a high school and talking about whether that high school is right for the child. But let's start with you first. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
You would, where I kind of start is, well, I go and I visit a bunch of schools, and I kind of get an idea for the different profiles, and I visit all of you guys, and we all know each other well. So I think a lot of education for myself and the parents is the first place to start. And then what I actually do is I read through their evals. I actually encourage them to update evals either through the district or privately. And I know that can sometimes take a little while. So I tell parents to get on that sooner rather than later. I look through their evals, I get in and observe them in classes. If they're working with an advocate outside, I meet with the advocate, meet with the kiddo one-on-one, meet with the parents, and then meet with the kiddo and parents, because it's definitely different to have those, good to have those different kind of perspectives. And then we kind of come up with a list. The parents go and visit the schools, and depending on their child, they say, take your child for the first visit. Sometimes they say don't, just to kind of have everybody on the same page. And they kind of go through the list and see what works for them. I think a lot of it is, I think parents a lot of times are like, I have to get my kid into this school, even though we have not, our kids aren't linear and more complex. We still have that feeling, like that almost like college admissions feeling. And we have to take a step back and realize that, and trust our schools that they're going to accept the kiddos that are right for them. And if they don't get accepted, that's because they're not meant to be there. So just kind of making the process more about like what the kiddo needs as opposed to this whole like, I don't know, like high school application rush that I feel like sometimes everybody in the area kind of gets into.
Yeah.
Slowing it down a bit.
Beth, can you opine on that, particularly from the standpoint of, obviously, Winston, has, a robust high school program, and how do you think about that, as a placement option relative to, other placement options or returning to district or whatever the myriad of opportunities might be?
I think we're always looking at the trajectory of our students, right? Like where are they going? What's the next step? What's the long term? I think an important piece I don't want to forget mentioning is that we do tell our students come high school that you are now official on paper. You now have a transcript that follows you, right? You didn't have it all your academic years until now. So now, your investment and your partnership in your education becomes even that much more important, because when you and we sit down with you and we go through the process of next steps. And it is a process, just begins junior year for us formally, but of course the conversations, as Bill said earlier, kind of start younger. But I think recognizing that this is now very official stuff, and every student that's in high school has a transcript, and that transcript is what goes on to your next step. So recognize that, and we're here to partner with you and provide you with the tools, but that ownership needs to really begin to take place at this age. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a relationship with Landmark College. I think some other folks here may as well. We've had students take classes at Norwalk Community College, Westchester Community College. So just however we could expose kids to, again, what a college experience is like, is important. We have our transitions program for students that maybe have not yet internalized and generalized those skills that we've talked about, those qualities of a sustainable and independent learner, the advocacy, the problem solving, the self-regulation, the time management and organization, and the self-awareness, right? Who am I as a learner? Where's my toolbox? What do I do when this becomes an obstacle? So the transitions program is there. We have something called Winston College that helps our kids further along the way. But for high school, I think just reminding kids that, your choices are, something that can end up on paper. And you need to be aware of that. This really reflects upon your experience. And but we continue the trajectory of what are your goals and objectives? What are your gains? Where are we taking you? And making sure that we provide internships for some of our students that are interested. I have a friend who is a radio personality here locally, and
I've done her show.
Her well. She's
so great. Yeah.
Thailand petting the elephants, but that's a great experience. That exposure to the workplace.
Yeah.
And is something else that's important. And I think that, if parents could ever get their kids to volunteer, and the community service piece, that's so important. So I think we continue with the objectives that are there. We continue to, again, that trajectory of success for our students. But to Allie's point, when you're making those placements, you want to match a student's wants with their needs, right? But those needs are so important. And what are your needs as a learner in order for you to be successful? So that's something that we're always looking at, because as I tell parents, you start high school, but you're going to blink and you're going to be having that conversation about college. And Christine, you're a witness to that. All the moms on the screen and dads are on the screen. So It goes by quickly.
Bill, you have an interesting perspective on this because you've just started a high school, so talk about that, and how that, that has, adjusted your thinking about the transition process for your Villa Maria learners as they're in kind of that, that eighth grade, eighth, ninth grade time frame.
I'm going to echo a lot of what Beth just said. I think that one of the things that again, here comes that word independence again. As we get our kids thinking about independence and what that looks like, our schools are wonderful, safe, understanding environments. And how do we get them to practice the social pragmatic, executive functioning skills outside of our four walls? And so when we were developing this idea for a high school, it was really important that starting in the 9th and 10th grade, that service learning be a really important piece. So our kids are out every week in a service project. We have 5 different projects, throughout Fairfield County, mostly in Stamford. And then hopefully that the idea is that by 11th grade that they will be in a full-time internship in one of these placements. And then varied, so they range from a nursing home with a partnership with the Bartlett Arboretum, to working in a thrift shop, to working at a food pantry. Getting our kids to be uncomfortable, it's stuff that we ask our kids to do in the classroom all the time, but then that becomes safe. And so how do we practice being uncomfortable in a place where we still have a coach, we're still guided through that process, and service becomes part of that.
Right.
So I think that was a really important piece of thinking about what we wanted the high school to look like. We're trying to meet a need for so many of our kids who have more complex learning profiles, have nowhere to go.
Mhm.
There aren't high schools for them, and so where they're limited. You're looking at us.
We're looking at them. Yeah,
Or
actually,
you're looking at us
looking at
on the
them right
screen
here.
right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And so what else could we do to help them, be successful and be independent at the same time, continue that remediation,
Mhm.
and so that's really what we're
Provide
looking
that opportunity. Tammy, you're coming from this actually from a slightly different perspective, and obviously as a therapeutic, a therapeutic school for, highly academic students in high school, you've gone, to a slightly different route in that you're now opening a middle school. So obviously you've had experience over your history with with transitioning students, stepping down from your program to other less structured programs. Talk a little bit about, the thought process behind establishing the middle school and how that might change the way that you look at the high school transition process.
Sure, yes, thank you. So now Spire is grades 6 through 12, and it's really about earlier intervention, helping students coming in the 6th and 7th grade to develop the skills and the confidence to then successfully transition into high school. So middle school, we're really thinking about helping with those executive function skills, yes. Thinking about they're still active. They still tend to emote through behavior more than, responding to talk therapy, for example. So it's thinking about engaging hands-on learning and ways of self-expression that they feel safe and nurtured and understood, really incorporating their interests. We really cater to a group of students that is intellectually capable, but has, the ADHD, anxiety, depression, school avoidance. Yeah. So it's about making school fun again and normalizing that the learning process, yes, can be uncomfortable, but then there are these other areas you can dip into that are aligned with your interests and that you're enthusiastic about. And then hopefully those interests then, bleed into other areas that you're willing to take chances, you're willing to take on risks, and you're willing to do that hard work. So it's really about incorporating for our students the arts, music, right, the STEM activities, right? A lot of computer right, coding, game right, design, AI is all the rage now, of course. So students are very curious about how to use this wisely in their academics. So, and to Beth's point, this is a time where you're not worried about checking box. It's about credit and having a transcript. So this is really about unearthing a lot of that motivation, enthusiasm for learning and helping them build the skills. So then when they get into high school in 9th grade, when you do have to start thinking about those graduation requirements and it is counting, that they are prepared, that they know how to get there.
Right. Absolutely. And Maggie, obviously, you, just to round out our group, you have a uniquely flexible and individualized model, that allows students to learn, on a one-on-one basis. You know, Obviously, when they leave Fusion, they're transitioning to an environment that is, going to be less personalized by design, and also, bigger and, perhaps more overwhelming. How do you kind of work through that, that transition, and obviously identifying the right, place for them, and also helping them move along?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every student at Fusion is different, right? So when they come in, the program that we build for them and where they're starting is very different from where their peers are starting. It's very individualized to them, and starting with those parent goals, starting with their individual goals. And though the classes are one-to-one, we balance our days so that actually 60% of their time on campus is out around other peers. So whether they're completing independent work, they're co-working in a space with other peers. We do have 1 hour of the day, a lunch hour, that is reserved not for homework. It's just for socialization, clubs, activities, presentations. We have speakers come and engage the students on all various different topics. Sometimes we separate our middle school students and our high school students depending on what it might be. But one really powerful thing for our high schoolers is we have colleges come and visit, and these are the representatives from those schools that will be reading their application. And it's an opportunity to really ask them about it. We invite all of our student body to those meetings. So even if you're in the 8th grade and you're just curious about what college admissions look like, they can go to them, and they frequently do. They're curious about it. So those are different. We try to cater different events to round out sometimes the group population that we have, but then also target the groups of students that need a lot of support for an upcoming transition. With that, we do a lot of community service, like Bill said, and trying to ignite and engage them with their community in things that they really care about. So whether it's giving back and volunteering at Neighbor to Neighbor, maybe they really love animals, and a place like the Lucky Dog Refuge is a great place for them to go and socialize with the dogs. We really try to find varied activities for them. And then a big piece for us is public speaking, because they are one-to-one, they are comfortable. And, they may say to their teachers, oh, you know what I mean. But when you're out in a large group and you're presenting and you're conveying an idea, not everybody is going to know what you mean. So making sure that they're clear and exposed, and desensitizing them to the safety of the one-to-one in these larger group opportunities. One piece of feedback that we get from our alumni that I think is really special and to highlight here is the structure that we offer to our students is really valuable when they get to college. They've learned the executive functioning skills of, it's fresh in my mind, I'm going to go to the library. So they use our homework cafe or our study hall times to help build structure into their day beyond Fusion. So while it's fresh in my mind, you know what, I'm just going to go to the library and I'm going to start working on this. And that initiation skill within executive functioning, they've really built that through their practice at Fusion. So whether it's middle school to high school or high school to college, the structure and routine of the program really lends itself to their next step.
We didn't talk about this, before, but, I'd be interested to hear, your thoughts on, on boarding, and, what is, what's a, kind of, something that, that makes you think, hey, this student might be a good candidate for, for boarding program. We're fortunate around here that there are a few, boarding programs that are, that are really supportive to our learners. So, I'm interested to hear that, maybe starting with Allie, because you all have a boarding program on, on campus, at Eagle Hill.
Yeah, of course. So interestingly, I mean, plenty of our kiddos that board at Eagle Hill go off to boarding, but we have a lot of kiddos also that haven't boarded with us that are ready for that boarding transition. I think the biggest thing is the family dynamic. Our kiddos, we love our kiddos. Our kiddos love us, but it's difficult. It's wearing on the relationship between parent and child when you are still in this space where schooling is so complex and complicated. And sometimes it's helpful for a family that's struggling with that to be in a setting where they won't work together every day on homework, and where there is someone else monitoring screen time and things like that. So that's a big piece in terms of
your own
Right.
boarding program, yeah.
Thinking
Yeah.
exactly, it needs a boarding program. I also have plenty of families that come in and are like, absolutely not sending my kid to boarding school. And like you all said, there's few options for our kiddos locally for high school. So they realize that they have to go boarding and that there are such fantastic, amazing, personalized, robust boarding programs. So that's the other piece. It's more of like a family dynamic thing. And then there's just when they need another school and there's just not enough of them
Yeah.
here. But yeah.
And honestly, sometimes it's like, you know, sometimes they gotta, they have to be in an environment where they can, safely forget their keys,
Yep.
and then, have that learning process that comes with, forgetting their keys and then having to deal with sort of the ramifications of that. But, anyone else want to opine on, considering boarding for, for your students?
I think as Ali said, it's a function of family. I think it's a family agreement. You had to have the family on board. But I think for some students, we talk about that independence. It's certainly exposure. You can start small. A lot of the boarding schools have summer programs.
Hmm.
So that's something that we recommend for a lot of our families. And I think that, sometimes it may be the best thing for a family. There may be circumstances that call to that, but it has to, I think it's best when it's agreed
Yeah.
upon.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it comes up, not very often with us, but it's a conversation. And we do see the kids that come from Eagle Hill that have done the boarding piece to be a little bit more aware and a little bit more mature. So I think that's the experience.
Yeah, definitely can have some benefits. The last question I wanted to pose to all of you is, you all work very closely with families about what the appropriate next high school step is for the child. You develop a list, you visit, you talk to the family, you meet the kid, you meet the parents, and the kid. What are some red flags to you that a student might not be ready to make the transition to high school or to the high school that he, she, and their parents have targeted? And how do you deal with that?
I think it sounds silly again, but my biggest marker is I ask the parents when they visited, can you see your kid walking this campus? If your child can't navigate a school, no matter how badly they want to go to it, all the other things kind of peter out. If you can't find your class, you won't be able to find your dorm. If you'll have harder time finding the student center to make friends. And it sounds so silly, but I really think so much comes out of that question. Can you navigate the campus?
Mhm.
And what do you do when it's not the right fit? I think that's a really hard one. I
They
think
really want to go back to district, but obviously, like, for whatever reason, there could be a million reasons why the district isn't, like, the district high school is not the right fit. How do you approach that?
if the district's not the right fit, I'd like to let me think for a second. I think
Someone
that
else can weigh in
yeah,
too. Yeah.
I could jump in. I also think it's their participation to their community. If they're not participating in a smaller community like ours or any of the
Yeah.
wonderful schools that we're talking about here, if they're not
That's a
participating in
great
it,
point, Maggie. Yeah.
there's no way that they're going to be able to go to a 4,000 kid high school, and be able to advocate for themselves or meet the expectations of the teachers, the schools, and their peers.
Mhm.
I think an important piece of the application process for high school students is why are you here? And oftentimes, I'm sure everyone on the screen knows it's because my mother took me or my parents said I have to be here. Those are the two common questions and responses rather. And, I think that's really an important piece is to explain, who each of us are and what we provide. And, we kind of break down, well, we're different because you're right, Christine. It's a lot of kids, they don't want to go to something smaller. They don't want to have that feeling of having to go to a school they don't want to. They want to go where their friends go, though. They
Yeah.
want to go where they were. And,
Mhm.
kind of just helping families and students recognize, well, that's a great goal to have and we can help you get there. But, this is a place, and it takes time because, as I said, then kids don't always come skipping through the door, but within a matter of weeks, I think we're all pretty surprised how kids then feel, as Bill said, kids feel safe and understood. It's a big difference, and they no longer feel perhaps that they're the outlier where
Mhm.
they were, or they're getting help. They ask for help and they're getting help. So they feel understood. But I think that's a big question that we ask. And during the visit, we see how open students are to engaging and being in the process. I think, so the red flag would be someone that is so extremely opposed to it and can't shift into thinking that way. That's a conversation we would have with the family, whether or not it was something that we should continue to proceed to investigate, or do we feel that maybe something else is the interim?
Yeah. Bill?
I think that we've developed our own person-centered planning just because we were in the situation where a kid or a parent had an idea about where the next step was, and it wasn't the right next step. And rather than wait and having that conversation, a difficult conversation in the moment when we're in the transition meeting, we've developed a plan where there is a survey where we're asking all these really good questions so that we can see, does the team agree with the parent and does the parent agree with the kid? So when we show up at this meeting where everyone's at the table, we can have and guide that conversation, whether we have to guide the kids with the parent support to a different decision, or do we need to help guide the parents to a more thoughtful decision? Going back to district's a hard one because sometimes going back to district is the only option.
Yeah.
Sometimes districts have pulled funding. There's no more funding. They've invested everything in elementary and middle school.
No, that's a great point. And, I'm saying this as if like everyone has limitless choice,
No, but and so how do I best, that goes back to this, having to be proactive in that transition planning with the district. What can you offer? And we all been through it. We know what they're going to say and what they can actually offer. But making sure that all of those things are in place so that the kids, when they have to go back to district to a much bigger school, that there, those kinds of supports are there.
Tammy?
Yeah, I would agree. I think a major red flag that we would see at Spire if a student is particularly think about leaving our environment and going into a larger public school is that lack of independence, the lack of taking responsibility, and the lack of, responding to redirection. I think if this is a student that is avoiding responsibility, avoiding class, hiding in the bathroom, needs to be found.
Not accepting feedback, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole point of going into the public school for them is to be off the radar, right? To be a fly in the wall.
Right.
Well, maybe that's not the best choice, right? Maybe there's work to be done in a more small, nurturing environment.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It was, just really, a blessing to have, the five of you here sharing, your, probably 100 years of, of educational experience when you add it all up. We are thrilled and, obviously that, everyone's joined us and shared all your thoughts about the high school transition process as, exciting and fraught as it is. And we look forward to seeing everybody on March 30th at our Special Education Legal Fund and Special Education Equity for Kids Resource Fair from 2 to 5 at the Stanford JCC. Please register, stop by. You'll see pretty much all these people there, and and have a chance to talk to them one-on-one. So thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great night.
Christine, thanks.
Thank you, Christine. Have a good night.
Stay warm.